That night, he was just a nobody, a forgotten, homeless veteran, until one man in a sleek coat turned his life upside down. No one could have guessed that a random twist of fate would lead him to a stage under flashing cameras, saying words that left an entire nation speechless. What happened next? Let's start from the very beginning. It was one of those nights where the cold felt personal, like it had a vendetta against every exposed patch of skin. The streets of Washington were quieter than usual, blanketed in a thin layer of frost that made every step sound like a crunching accusation. Out of nowhere, walking as casually as if it were his backyard, was none other than Donald Trump. Yeah, that Donald Trump. The guy who once made headlines for everything from his tweets to his ties. Except this time, he wasn't flanked by Secret Service or followed by a trail of cameras. No entourage, no flashing lights, just him, a long cashmere coat that screamed expensive, and that iconic red hat perched on his head like a crown. He strolled with an air of purpose, his breath visible in the icy air, though what he was doing out there on such a night was anyone's guess. Maybe nostalgia? Or maybe he just wanted to see the city without the filter of tinted windows and security briefings. Whatever his reason, it wasn't long before something, or rather someone, caught his attention. On the corner of a dimly lit block, just outside a restaurant with closed slapped on the door, sat a man. Well, more like huddled. He was wrapped in what looked like an old army coat, one that had seen better days, probably back when it was issued. A makeshift sign propped up next to him read, "James Veteran, anything helps." Trump stopped mid-step, his gaze locking onto the man like he'd spotted something that didn't belong. A veteran? The man, James, sat on a tattered piece of cardboard, his hands shaking, whether from the cold or sheer exhaustion. It wasn't clear. The guy looked like life had taken everything from him and then had the audacity to come back for more. His hollow cheeks, the lines etched into his face, and his downcast eyes told a story Trump didn't need to ask to know. "Hey," Trump said, breaking the silence with his trademark directness. "You're a veteran?" James looked up slowly. His movements stiff, like even that took too much effort. His voice, rough and uneven, cracked as he spoke. "Yeah, Iraq," he said, pausing as if that single word was a weight he had to carry. "Veteran, who doesn't matter anymore." The words hung in the air, heavier than the cold. Trump glanced around. The street wasn't empty, but it might as well have been. People were walking past, pretending not to see James, their heads down like looking would somehow make them responsible. Some even crossed to the other side of the street. Trump frowned. This wasn't the kind of frown he wore when someone misspelled his name on a headline. This was different. Maybe it was guilt, maybe pity, or maybe, for the first time, he saw something that didn't sit right with him. "Nobody, huh?" Trump said, his tone sharper now. He leaned down slightly, his eyes locking onto James's. "Let's fix that." Before James could even process what was happening, Trump reached into his coat pocket and pulled out his phone. His fingers moved fast, dialing a number with the precision of someone who was used to giving orders. His voice, low but commanding, cut through the icy air. The call was short, but James caught enough to know it wasn't small talk. Something about a car, something about now. A few minutes later, the growl of a sleek black limousine broke the quiet. The car pulled up, its glossy exterior practically glowing under the dim streetlights. Trump gestured toward the limo. "Get in." James hesitated. Look, when you've been on the streets as long as he had, you don't just jump into random cars, no matter who's asking. But then again, it wasn't every day a former president told you to get in his limo. Hunger and cold fought with caution, and hunger won. With shaky hands, James pushed himself to his feet. He wasn't steady, but he managed. The door opened, and the warmth spilling out felt like a promise. He shuffled forward, his steps slow, unsure if he was walking into salvation or another kind of trap. Trump, already holding the door, gave him a look that said, "Are you coming or what?" And just like that, James climbed in. What he didn't know was that his night and his life was about to take a turn no one could have predicted. When the limo pulled up to the grand entrance of one of Washington's most luxurious hotels, James couldn't believe his eyes. The building towered above him, with its golden lights glowing against the frosty night sky. The revolving doors spun in slow motion, letting out a warmth that felt like stepping into another world. James, still wrapped in his worn-out coat, hesitated. It was as if just walking through those doors would somehow shatter the illusion. Donald Trump, however, didn't miss a beat. He strode inside like he owned the place, his polished shoes clicking on the marble floor. Heads turned, people stared. A few murmurs rippled through the lobby, but no one dared approach. Behind him, James shuffled in, feeling every curious glance from the pristinely dressed guests. Trump reached the front desk, where a young receptionist froze at the sight of him. Before she could stammer out a greeting, he slid a gleaming gold credit card across the counter. "Get this man your best room," he said, pointing at James, "and call a doctor, now." The receptionist blinked, glanced at James, then back at Trump. "Of course, Mr. Trump," she said, her voice shaking slightly as she grabbed the card. Within moments, the entire staff seemed to spring into action. A team of bellhops appeared with towels. A manager rushed out to oversee everything, and even a chef poked his head out from the kitchen as if to see what the fuss was about. No one asked questions. No one dared. James was led to a suite that could have passed for an art gallery. The room was massive, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. A king-sized bed draped in the finest linens, and a bathroom that looked like something out of a five-star spa. Before he knew it, a doctor arrived, followed by a parade of hotel staff, carrying fresh clothes, hot food, and more amenities than he'd ever seen in his life. For the first time in years, James took a real shower. The hot water stung at first, washing away layers of grime and despair, but eventually, it felt like redemption. He wrapped himself in a soft robe that smelled of lavender and collapsed into the bed, his body sinking into the mattress. The warmth, the cleanliness, the quiet, it was almost too much. Yet, as he stared at the ceiling, a gnawing thought wouldn't leave him alone. "Why is he doing this?" James whispered to himself. But the exhaustion won out, and he drifted into the deepest sleep he'd had in years. The next morning, James was woken by a knock at the door. A staff member informed him that breakfast was ready. When he stepped into the dining room, he froze. The table was something out of a movie, perfectly laid out with silverware that gleamed under the chandelier, fresh flowers arranged in crystal vases, and a spread of food that could feed a small army. At the head of the table sat Trump, reading a newspaper as casually as if this were just another day. "Sit down," Trump said without looking up, motioning to the chair across from him. James sat, awkwardly picking at the food in front of him, unsure if he was even allowed to eat it. After a few moments, Trump folded the paper and leaned back. "So," Trump began, his tone sharp but not unkind, "how did you end up on the street?" James hesitated. He wasn't used to people asking, let alone caring, but something about the way Trump looked at him made it clear he wanted the truth. "So," James told him, about the 15 years he spent serving in Iraq, about the friends he lost and the scars he carried, both seen and unseen, about how the government that promised to support him had turned its back, leaving him to fend for himself. He spoke of failed job interviews, the humiliation of begging for help, and how, eventually, even his family gave up on him. "The worst part," James said, his voice cracking slightly, "isn't the cold or the hunger. It's the way people look at you or don't, like you're not even there, like you're just nothing." Trump listened in silence, his expression unreadable. When James finished, the room was quiet for a long moment. Then Trump leaned forward, his elbows on the table. "We're going to fix this," he said simply, as if it were a matter of fact. James opened his mouth to ask what he meant, but Trump was already on the phone. The calls came rapid fire, his voice carrying a tone of authority that left no room for debate. Names were mentioned, arrangements were made, and plans were set in motion. James sat there, watching as the man orchestrated something bigger than he could comprehend. Whatever it was, one thing was clear: his life was about to change forever. James woke up that morning feeling something he hadn't in years: peace. The bed was softer than any cloud he could imagine, the faint aroma of freshly brewed coffee wafted from the cart by the door, and the sun spilled golden light through the massive windows. For a guy who'd spent years making a cardboard box his home, this was practically paradise. He was still getting used to the small luxuries, like warm towels and people who actually called him sir. But this morning wasn't like the others. A firm knock on the door startled him. Before he could even respond, the door opened and in walked Donald Trump, looking like he'd stepped out of a magazine. Black suit, red tie, polished shoes, you know, the whole power player vibe. "James," Trump said, giving him a once-over. His expression didn't give away much, but there was something in his tone. Anticipation, maybe? "Today's the day everything changes." James blinked. Good morning to you too?" Trump didn't respond. Instead, he motioned for James to get dressed. "Suit up, we're leaving in 10. James, now fully awake, scrambled to pull himself together. The new clothes fit perfectly, a tailored suit that made him look like he belonged at a Wall Street board meeting. He barely had time to process what was happening before he was ushered out of the room and into the hotel lobby, where a convoy of sleek black cars was waiting. The ride was quiet. Trump sat beside him, scrolling through his phone, his expression calm and collected. James, on the other hand, was anything but calm. His mind raced with questions, but every time he glanced at Trump, it was clear he wasn't getting answers anytime soon. Finally, the convoy stopped. James stepped out and froze. In front of him was the White House, its iconic facade glowing in the morning light. But that wasn't the shocking part. The lawn was packed with people, journalists, photographers, TV crews. An impromptu stage had been set up, and the buzz of anticipation hung heavy in the air. "What's going on?" James managed to ask, his voice barely above a whisper. Trump smiled, a rare, genuine kind of smile. He pointed toward the stage. "Today, you're not invisible anymore." James barely had time to process those words before Trump strode onto the stage, his presence commanding immediate attention. The murmurs of the crowd quieted as he approached the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen," Trump began, his voice strong and clear, "today I stand before you to introduce a true American hero, a man who has given more to this country than most can imagine, yet has received so little in return." The crowd shifted, cameras zoomed in, and all eyes turned toward James. He felt his knees weaken, but somehow he managed to walk up the steps to join Trump on stage. "This is James," Trump continued, gesturing toward him. "He served our country with honor and courage, only to be abandoned by the very system that promised to protect him. Today, that changes." James didn't know what to do with his hands. He felt the weight of thousands of eyes on him, the clicks of cameras capturing every second. Then Trump dropped the bombshell. "I am proud to announce the launch of a new initiative dedicated to supporting veterans like James," he declared. "This fund, starting with a personal contribution of $10 million, will ensure that no hero is left behind." The crowd erupted into applause. James could barely believe what he was hearing. Before he could even process it, Trump handed him the microphone. "Say what's on your mind," Trump said quietly. "This is your moment." James swallowed hard. Public speaking wasn't exactly his thing, but as he looked out at the crowd, he thought about everything he'd endured. The years of being ignored, the cold nights, the hopelessness. And now, here he was, standing on a stage, being called a hero. "I don't need pity," he started, his voice shaky but growing stronger. "What I need, what we all need, is justice. Thousands of veterans are out there right now, living on the streets, forgotten by the country they served. We gave everything, and we got nothing in return. But today, I believe we can change that." The crowd fell silent, hanging on his every word. A few reporters dabbed at their eyes. Someone in the back started clapping, and soon the entire lawn was filled with applause. As James stepped back, Trump patted him on the shoulder. The cameras captured the moment, and within hours, it was all over the news. Donations poured into the new fund. Social media exploded with hashtags supporting the initiative. People from every corner of the country started reaching out, offering jobs, housing, and assistance to veterans in need. For James, that day marked the beginning of a new chapter. He wasn't just surviving anymore, he was living, and for the first time in years, he felt like he mattered. As for Trump, the headlines were all about his bold new move to support veterans. Whether it was altruism, strategy, or a bit of both, it didn't matter. What mattered was that lives were changing. and it all started with one man refusing to let another be invisible. How would you act in his place? What are your thoughts on this story? Share your comments below. Have you or someone you know faced a similar situation? Don't forget to like this story and share it with others if it moved you. Together, we can shed light on these important issues and work toward a better world. This story was created with the purpose of spreading awareness and inspiring positive change. Your opinion matters, and your voice can make a difference. Let's work together to make the world a kinder and more just place for everyone.